welcome back to Practical Tube Amp course. This is what month is it? October. Playoffs are going on. The Orioles are playing today. Hopefully we get a win and continue on with the playoffs. Today we have Matthew Manhire from Root Beer Audio, which is in Virginia. And
I'm in Philly.
Philly. Why did I think you were in Virginia?
Yeah.
I don't know. Sorry about that. Oh, Philly.
Oh, you're fine.
Philly, yeah. So why don't you give us the quick introduction for yourself, a little bio for yourself.
So yeah, hi. I'm Matt. I've been in business as Root Beer Audio since about 2009. I got into electronics work. I don't do any really other than intonation on a guitar. I'm not really a luthier. But I've been building and repairing guitar amps for about 15 years. And I do a mix of I'm also a full-time teacher. I teach electronics classes and pedal building classes and stuff at a local art school at UArts. So my business is kind of a mixture of custom amps, random projects, and then I used to do a whole lot of repairs, and I've sort of just kind of how I think Luke and I got talking. I'm often stopping repairs and then reopen for a few months and so on to keep my sanity. That's kind of it.
Yeah. And that's how we kind of started talking the other week. Matt and I have, our friends on Instagram, just like a lot of us are. And we started talking last week about some of the same frustrations. I reached out to you to see if I could recommend some people your way. And you're like, I'm kind of swamped. And then we started talking about how do we not become swamped? Should we start raising our prices? And then we went down a rabbit hole. So we're talking about plumbers, electricians, trades, and what they get paid. And then we always try to compare ourselves to those types of people. And then I kind of strayed off and said, well, I'd like to compare myself to the marine world and the classic car world, whereas we're in a luxury business. Some of us repair for the working musician, and maybe we're a little bit more of a laborer. But I think the type of work that you and I do is more in a restoration class. And classic cars aren't worth what people pay the mechanic to fix them, and they're not worth these $10,000 paint jobs. So why should we feel guilty for charging what we charge? I think that's where you and I kind of came to the conclusion, well, what if we charge $200 an hour?
Yeah. Well, and then there's so many riffs off that topic, but even I think you mentioned it in the one thread, an hourly rate, and what does an hourly rate even mean? Are you billing? Are you actually starting the clock and how long it takes to do the time? Does that include the head scratching time? You're trying to figure out the problem. I feel especially with electronics, that's half the issue. But a lot of us, I'm sure most of us probably do use an hourly rate, and maybe you're all better at using it than I am, but I've always felt like it's almost a just dimensionless unit. I call it an hour, but it's just my random scale. And I have gotten close at times. I set up this Nickelodeon clock back there, and I was trying to actually do it and be all right, I went up to the bathroom, and trying to really do it. And if I'm being honest, so it sort of did equate fairly better than I thought. But it does feel kind of arbitrary.
Yeah, I think for the standard jobs, it doesn't, and the hourly rate fits in there. But for the non-standard jobs, or the ones that start giving you trouble, that's when we start working for $50 an hour or $20 an hour, or sometimes $5 an hour.
Totally.
I'm working, actually, this has been a reoccurring subject on this series. I've been working on this blind bassman for I guess 3 months now. I keep popping it on the bench. I cannot figure out what's wrong with it. And I'm certainly not getting $100 an hour for it. But so, and is that because could somebody else have figured it out faster? And is that why I'm not charging $100 an hour? Or, I guess that's what I kind of have always like related my hourly rate. Like if somebody that was all knowing and was the perfect amp repair person, how fast would they have been able to fix this? And I think I've come to a point in my career that there might be people that can do things a little bit faster than me, but I can do things that faster than them. And it's just a group of experience. So I forget where I was going with that.
Could I ask you something about that basement? I'm just kind of curious about.
Yeah.
You know, I've kind of wondered this over the years. So I grew up, I grew up, my dad just like has a bunch of old stuff. I grew up on an old farm, and there's always like a trash Jeep that he's trying to get some local mechanic to fix or like something. And you know, this one guy was kind of a specialist, and a lot of times we have a situation where he'd be like, it's the carburetor, and he'd replace it, and then it's still the same problem, and he'd be like, okay, well, you know, it wasn't the carburetor, but at least you have a new carburetor now. And I've always kind of wondered, like, I don't know what you've put in that amp, but if you're like, hey, I think it's the caps, right? Because you can like kind of test for that, but sometimes you just have to do the repair, you know, or like worst case scenario, like a transformer. You're like, hey, especially when you're maybe know a little less, you're starting out, but you're like, hey, the transformer, I think, you know, I suspect. And then you replace it, but that's not the issue. And then you're like, am I eating the transformer? Did they need it already? Am I just eating all that labor? And personally, my move has actually just been eating it a lot of times, but I don't know. I've just kind of always wondered how you go about that. Like, I'm assuming you've had some, like, with that amp, you've probably been like, this is probably it, but it still has an issue. And yeah, how do you recoup that time? Or, you know, do you pass it on to the customer?
Yeah, I guess it just depends. I think so when I think sometimes it just takes this long to figure out some of these very strange issues. I've never had a problem with a vintage Fender before, like a vintage turret board or eyelet board Fender. I've never spent this much time on an amplifier. It's very unusual. I mean, everything's right there. You can test everything. You know, I've tested every single component in here, and I think at the beginning, if the customer knew it was going to cost $1,000 to fix, I'm not charging them $1,000, but if he knew it was going to be $1,000 to fix, he'd say, no, yeah, never mind. Like, I'm not going to do it. So now it's kind of like a personal vendetta against this amplifier. I'm like, I have got to figure this thing out. So now it's like on my terms. And I think if this was 100% my livelihood, I would have thrown in the towel several hours ago and just been like, hey, dude, listen, I can fix this, but I'm going to charge you an hourly rate, and I have no idea how long it's going to take. And I think that would be the most fair thing for me. And I think that's a reasonable thing for this amplifier and a reasonable thing for my experience level. Now, earlier on in my career, I guess that's not the case, because something you just don't know enough, and you just don't know enough. So you're taking too long to repair the piece of gear because you don't know what you're doing. And then, you know, and you learn, and that's a valuable experience, and you do it faster the next time, and that's all good. And that's, you know, that's why when you start out working in the real world, if someone's paying you, you know, they start paying you with the least experience, they pay you less, and the more experience, they pay you more because they get more out of you. And that's the same thing when you're working for yourself. Like, your hourly rate starts to be more valuable as you get more experience. So yeah, with this thing, man, I swapped out transformers, and I'm sure it seems like we're probably at the same level. And Tom, you're on here, Detroit Amp Lab. I feel like we're all very similar levels, similar ages. We're not 70 years old with that, you know, we didn't go to college for repairing tube amps. But you know, I have some extra transformers lying around just for these situations where you want to just sub in a transformer to see if that's the problem. I don't know what this amp, man. It's like this weird oscillation. You hit a big chord and it'll just like get it just gets sucked away. And I can't tell, I think it's an oscillation, but I can't see the oscillation at least isn't apparent on the scope when I hit the chord.
So is it kind
And
of
it
like,
doesn't,
I'm sorry, keep going.
no, go ahead.
I was
No,
gonna say,
go
if
ahead.
it's one of those things like if you give it a lot of signal, does it either gets louder, or you're saying it drops down, kind of weird?
Yeah, it like, I can actually put it on the scope and show you. Does it worse on the bass channel? Not so significant on the normal channel, but like I can tell, like, you know, I know what these are supposed to sound like, so I know it's not like sustaining correctly, which is why I think it's like some sort of oscillation. And at this point, I'm I think it's either the board or accumulation of like dirty wires, the dirty casing around the wires, that's causing like signal to be picked up, and then it must be like phase canceling. um because dude, I'm telling you, I swapped everything out and I can't figure it out, all the tubes, and I even swapped out caps. Obviously I did a electrolytic recap on it.
Yeah.
The only thing weird about it, it has a 2 ohm, so it has a 2 ohm super reverb transformer. Um, you know, someone swapped the transformer out at some point, and it had looked like they had even tried. I'm thinking maybe that was this issue before, and they tried troubleshooting the transformers, because it looked like the power transformer had been disconnected and then reconnected because the connections weren't very good. They didn't look like, you know, factory from Fender. And then of course the output transformer is still this 2 ohm output transformer. So I don't know. I don't have a 6L6 transformer, but I substituted just like an EL34 output transformer. And you know, it's I unless, you know, tell me if I'm wrong. I think Nathan was on here too. Nathan's another good amp tech. I just substituted the EL34 transformer like outside of the amplifier, just like tacked it in, and it did the same thing even with the,
Kind of
you know,
weird,
that other output transformer. So same symptom. I can't imagine it'd be a coincidence.
man. Yeah, those are the ones that
Um,
I sort of feel like with pricing stuff. Um, the easier jobs that you feel like were really efficient at making money. Like some Easy Blues Junior thing or something. Sort of. What I'm trying to say, like subsidizes those repairs sometimes.
oh yeah,
It's like the
definitely.
easier money it feels like. You know, but I've had a lot of
Have
those
you ever?
jobs in the last like year.
Yeah, yeah. Have you ever called in the towel on an amp and just said, I can't fix this?
Yeah, you asked me that, and I was trying to think, and I feel like, I mean, I'm definitely, but in terms of like my own business, like kind of bringing it into my own shop, it takes a lot. It takes a lot to do that, right? Because you get the person invested. They're like on the trail with you. You're like, hey, I think I got it. And then like it turns out you didn't, and trying to think if I've totally been like, I just can't do it. There's something in the last 2 years, and I hate to say, I just can't think what it is. I think there was something, and it might have been like a Bogner or something where I was like talking to the company, and I was eventually just like they almost didn't want to get involved with it, and I was like, listen, like I'm kind of just like I don't know, like
Yeah,
it's working, but I think they wanted something else to do with it, and but
yeah.
probably more than I remember.
I've had a few like more modern like PCB amps that I've come to the conclusion like, listen, I I can't go any further on this because the labor rate is going to outweigh, um, outweigh the usefulness of this repair to you. Not that I was like making that decision for them, but basically like, a hot rod deluxe with, the traces are all blown and worn out on it. It's like, I might as well just build you a new amp. Like, you want me to build you a new amp into this? Like, I can do that. So I don't call those situations necessarily calling in the towel, or throwing in the towel, but I don't know. I'm off this point with this one where I want to throw in the towel in it.
Well, I guess
So,
like in those situations, how do you feel about like charging after? That's kind of something I've always, it's like, how do you, like, if somebody brings you an amp and you work on it and you spend 10 real hours on it, like, super focused 10 or more hours, and you didn't figure it out, do you eat that? Do you charge do you have like a built-in, minimum fee for your shop? Or I'm like,
I think, I mean, unless
If
you mean
I
when you throw into the towel, how do you still charge for it? I
Yeah.
wouldn't. If I throw in the towel on an amp, I won't charge. Now, if I did a legitimate diagnosis, or came to the conclusion, listen, to go any further on this, it's going to cost X amount of dollars. Do you want to do it? I've spent this much time. I troubleshot these things. To go any further, I will charge like a minimum there, depending on how long I took on it, If it was clear communication up front, I'll take had people bring in like SVT classics and stuff, that like these super difficult PCB amps, and like, listen, I'll take a look at it, but it's going to take me 2 hours at least to get in and out of this amp and give you a diagnosis. And it still might not be fixed. It might need more labor hours. Are you okay with that? Then I'll charge, because I did come up with a conclusion. I came up with a diagnosis,
yeah,
that's what
if I could chime in on that, is the meeting in service yet, or is this still just general?
Figure it out.
Yeah, go ahead. It's
Yeah.
in service, but I'm
just going to say that the risk with there, we had an amp tech working with us. There were 3 of us in the shop at that time. About he kind of resigned from the trade about 8-9 years ago, just out of frustration with so much of the difficulty and inaccessibility and cumbersome service of a lot of modern amps, and with the frustration with getting parts from manufacturers. Places like, I remember one Marshall that I think just threw him over the edge, that it was to a point where he couldn't go in and replace individual components. He needed a punch out circuit board from Marshall for whatever portion it was, and takes it in, and it took 4 months to get the part, from Marshall. All the time it's taking up space in our shop that we're paying to ensure. It's preventing us from using it for other purposes. The customer, of course, takes out their angst on us and on him as the tech, while we're being held up by inability to get parts. So, in cases like that, or in what you were just discussing of these jobs that turn into a 10-hour job, even if the customer agrees up front, there's just always a risk that every shop has just got to weigh on their own of how it's going to affect the long-term customer relations. A person might agree and say, yeah, I'll spend $1,000 getting this fixed up. But then, a year later, they're talking to friends and they relay the story of, yeah, I've got this, $1,200 amp that took $1,000 and 6 months to get done. And it can end up coming back to bite you in the end, even if they agree to pay such a huge amount. When it reaches a certain level of cost to benefit ratio, there's always the risk that it can turn sour and leave a bad taste in people's mouth anyway. I don't envy amp techs. You guys have a harder time, I think, with that, with the work that goes into diagnostics, than we can usually do with guitars. I feel like it's easier for us to diagnose on the bench when it comes in before it's dropped off, so that everything can be agreed on up front. Whereas with amps, you can't do that. You have to take the time to, take it apart out of sight after they leave, and then give them a quote that could result in them having to pay something for a diagnostic, but still not getting an amp back that works. And there's always that risk of bad feelings there.
Yeah, that's a great point, David. I talk about that all the time. I have a business friend, a buddy that owns a couple businesses, and talking to him, and he said, "Well, you just got to charge." I told him about the frustrations and the things that you're talking about, we're talking about right now, and he's like, "Well, you just got to charge more." I'm like, "Yeah, but I don't know if that is the solution. You just charge more, and then you get into the situation that you're talking about, where you're like, okay, yeah, they'll pay you $1,000, but then they're talking trash to all their friends about you, and you turn into this guy who charged a bunch of money for, an amp that wasn't worth it." And it can be weird, but it doesn't have and we started the conversation out on why is it like that? I mean, people go spend a ridiculous amount of money on a car restoration or spend boating with their friends every weekend. So I guess it depends on the amplifier, right? I guess people would dump a ton of money into a vintage early JTM 45 or Tweed Basement or something, but maybe not the Hot Rod Deluxe, and maybe not a SVT Classic.
Yeah.
Let me switch topics for a second. So I was just having this conversation with my buddy yesterday. I came in. So when replacing capacitors, particularly in an amplifier that is hard to disassemble, like a PCB amp, that's a pain in the butt to kind of get out and replace a capacitor. It has historically been the mindset that if you snip the leads and wrap the new capacitor around the old leads, that's kind of like bad workmanship. And I've never done it. I've never sent an amplifier out of the shop that way. But I'm starting to come to the conclusion, I don't understand why that's necessarily a bad repair in an amp that's difficult to get apart. I understand, I would never do that to a 60s era Fender where you can just desolder it from the eyelets. But on an amp that's hard to get apart, why can't we just snip them? What do you think about that?
Me?
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah. So it's funny. I got a few thoughts on that. I would say, so first off, there's kind of always been, so when I first moved to Philadelphia, I was actually getting a teaching degree, and part of my sort of work study, if you want to call it, was I was repairing studio equipment and amps for the music school that I was at. So those were we had a Fender deal. We were getting we'd have 30 Blues Juniors. We had old vintage PVs and stuff that almost should have been dead. Everything was beat to hell. So I would do, let's say, lesser than stellar repairs if it just got it through, because I was just doing bulk. I would do 30 amps in 2 weeks or something. Luke, are you still there? Is anyone else Okay, it seems like everyone else is still alive.
It's frozen.
Yeah, he's frozen.
Right.
Well, I think he's gone for a moment.
He lose connection.
What's normal protocol here? Keep talking, or I'll wait for him.
Yeah, we'll just wait for him. Just
Okay.
wait a bit.
Thanks for doing this. This is really interesting.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool to kind of sort of meet everyone and check this out.
Don't see him on there at all now. Yeah, I don't envy guys in your trade. It seems like you have a much more difficult time, much more challenges with appraisal of condition upon drop off. And that's always a fortunate thing where the work we do, 95% of what we take in, we can fully appraise the problems, the conditions, give the prognosis, the prescription, the cost, everything, while the customer is dropping it off in a brief inspection, and there's no question after they leave. You guys, there's no way. You have to pull things apart. You have to do a diagnosis, and the customer is committed to spending money on something without the foresight of knowing if they're even going to have it fixed or get value from it in the end. So it's a challenge. I don't think there's any way around. It's just being open about it is probably the biggest key. But
Well, and sometimes you get in a situation where I used to have more jobs like this, and I try to do less of that. But if people are obviously on a budget, which is pretty understandable, they bring you in an amp that has one issue, but you open it up and you see that it let's say potentially should or could have a lot more because it hasn't been treated well. Everything's about to go. They say they just want the tubes, but you can tell the caps are about to go. It really needs a lot of attention, and then you're kind of like, well, I can charge you this smaller rate and just do this, but then you're going to be annoyed when you get it back. And in 4 months, you probably going to have an issue. And that's just like, that used to be more of a common situation for me, at least.
you've just got a different market focus now. You've got.
Yeah, I kind of, I got a little more specialized, especially with just how COVID shook out. And I teach a little more. My day job just got a little filled in the gaps more. So I can kind of take in, let's say, for lack of a better term, like the better work. I think that's something Luke and I were talking about before we did this, was about, he asked me to take in people, and I was kind of riffing on, I sometimes say I'll open up, and then I'll just close my doors and say, I'm not taking any work. But for a while, what I was trying to do is I was trying to sort of filter it, which I don't feel too wrong about, but it can get hard. People talk to each other, like you're saying. And so, somebody gets in touch with an amp that, it's a pretty good job and I'm happy to work on it, or it's really cool, and I'm like, yeah, sure. And then, I'm not trying to take a lot in. And then they probably, they're nice and they tell my name to some friends of theirs and they get in touch and I'm like, oh, no, like, sorry. And so it was kind of a hard, I don't want to feel like I'm like, it's a popularity contest or I'm really trying to, only take in the cream of the crop. But
Yeah, but if you can be selective with your market, by all means.
yeah.
I think Luke is back here. It looks like.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, sorry, internet dropped out on me. We left off. You were telling me about a job you used to have repairing a bunch of like PCB amps.
Yeah. So anyway, back to about the like wrapping cap stuff. I used to, and we were kind of riffing on this when you were gone. I used to have, let's say, different markets. That was out of college. They just needed to work. It wasn't like I was taking one specific person's money for it. It was kind of like a flat rate. So it took out a lot of the variables. So I did, for lack of a better term, let's just say not great work. And it was okay. It was sort of like, just get this to make sound, do what you got to do. But another side of that is like, I always teach students, or I'm against like tack soldering and things like that. These like,
Oh yeah.
Like I feel like if you ever work on an old Sun, the minute you heat up one of the resistors, like the part flies, or it's like hardly, it's not like looped or anything. But then I have a student of mine who works at a DW Fern. They make like really high-end mic preamps, compressors and stuff outside Philadelphia. So these big red boxes, if any of you into like recording, they're kind of like synonymous. And he's like, we tack solder everything. He's like, we do these things that to me is like crappy, but they have certain things because they're really intense PCBs. And so there's certain things they do that make it easy for a future repair. So I'd say, to answer your question, I probably secretly am like, I've done it. I've definitely done it. Like you said, I would not do it on a vintage Fender right now. But, have I, on a Blues Junior? Well, actually, if I'm biasing a Blues Junior and I have no reason to take the board out, I'll kind of like loop a new resistor over the one, resistor legs.
Over the bias resistor. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't feel like there's anything wrong with it. Now, if you got, all right. So like, you got a Hot Rod Deluxe board. If you're replacing all the caps, by all means, take the whole board out and replace all the caps. but like we were talking about my buddy, it came up because my buddy has a Friedman and the caps on that board were bad. Like he had a bad batch of ARS caps. And the board is double-sided 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 traces.
Yeah.
And which can be difficult to get all of the solder out. And you got to heat it up so much. I said, dude, if that was my amp, I would just snip the leads on that capacitor that's wrong, that one capacitor, you know, and just like wrap it around there. I mean, what's the difference between doing that and doing it on like a turret board? You know, when you get turrets, you know, you wrap the lead around there and solder it on there, right? I'm not even talking tack soldering. I'm talking about wrapping the lead around the old lead to prevent you from, you know, possibly busting up those traces. I feel like that's a good reason to do that.
Well, I'd say like, you know, it's funny. I haven't taken one of these in like a decade, but you ever worked on a PV Classic 30?
Yep.
Those amps where it's like origami, you know, it's like the 3 boards. You know, certain amps like that, it's like if it's not worth removing it, because it's gonna like there's some designs where you're like, the more I remove this, the more I'm breaking it. Like even if I have like, you know, the softest touch, it's just but I would say the one other flip side of that is sometimes I worry is, you know, I wouldn't want to heat it up, you know, as you're soldering around the, let's say like the leftover lead,
Yeah.
you know, making sure I hope I'm not heating it up enough that like the bottom going to the board is like heating up and shifting or anything. But that's obviously like a pretty far reaching scenario.
Yep. No, but it's a good concern. And you do have to, you know, somebody like you or I, you know, and most experienced tech would understand that is a risk. And you could put like heat sinks at the bottom of the, you could put a heat sink at the bottom of that lead.
Oh yeah,
close to the board, so it prevents that.
yeah, totally.
But yeah, I know there's just like a lot of talk about that all the time. And anytime someone opens an amp, like, oh, someone wrapped the leads around it. Like, I don't know. If it's gonna cost you $150 to flip that board to replace one component, I don't see a problem with just snipping those leads and wrapping it around it as long as you can do it in a safe way. And you said you had a big project on the bench.
Yeah, so yeah, I've got a bunch of bigger projects, and so I was kind of trying to pause for a moment, and that's like I said, I was stopped taking in new work for a moment. And I'm sure a lot of you have this for your own stuff, you know, whatever that saying is about like the shoe repairman or something, or cobbler doesn't have shoes or whatever it is, but I never really get to work on my own stuff. This ties in pretty well. You can actually see the speakers in the back of my shop, probably that like baffle. So I was doing, I don't know if any of you know like the Pinto guitars or anything, but he wanted me to look at this. It's a really rare Gretsch stereo amp. It's called a Fury. And he wanted me to like restore it or something, and he was gonna like probably sell it, or I don't think it's for him. And it came in, and I found it took a lot of diagnosing it. You know, it's a crazy design. You can't really see it too well. I could move my computer, but you know, it's got a power amp chassis, a stereo power amp chassis in the bottom, preamp up top. The reverb tank, it must be the most annoying reverb tank I've ever seen. It's under a screwed in wood compartment under the chassis. Like it's hard. I didn't even know where it was at first. Originally, it took me, I had to remove the baffle to even get it out. That's why the speakers are actually out. But it was one of the bigger quotes. I told him after I realized the issue, the power transformer was shorted. And that's like a $500. It's a huge one. It's like getting an SVT one for some reason from Mercury. So I think the quote was like 900, or it's gotta be something insane with tubes and all this stuff. And he was kind of like, yeah, I don't need to get involved with that. So I've had it sitting here, and I bought that transformer, and it's been staring at me for a while. So it's actually, for me, I don't usually flip amps. Like I don't try to like really get in the habit of that, but I'm probably not going to keep this. I'm probably just going to try to sell it.
Yeah.
But I'm going to have a lot into it. Like it's the kind of job that only a tech would get involved with.
Yeah.
Or an insane person who wants to dump. I mean, yeah, it'd probably be like $1,000 job, honestly.
Yeah. That's funny because I saw that you had that, and I asked you if a customer by a name dropped that off, because a day or two before I saw you post the picture of that Fury, somebody asked me if I could repair a Fury, and I was like, no, not right now, I'm too busy. So that's why I asked you about it, and I'd never seen one, I never heard of one.
Yeah.
But
I
now
just
I'm glad.
I just love stereo amps. You know, you don't get them very often, but like the Ampeg Super Echo Twin, is that what's called? Whatever. I actually fixed one of those up for him in the past, and so when he had this, he was like, "Yo, you'd love this thing. You should restore it for me, whatever." And then, so it's
Two
also
output
kind of
trans-
to have it. But
Two output transformers.
two output transformers, yeah.
Yeah.
But I was able to diagnose that the power transformer was bad. It's a short. It's over there. It looks cooked. I mean, it looks like there was a small fire in the amp. It was pretty crazy looking. So
Yeah.
I didn't, you know, I didn't like, I'm not like replating a chassis level restoration, but I mean, I took everything off. I like scrubbed it, washed it. Like it took a ton of work. I had to rehouse the transformer. But yeah, it should be good to go. The reverb's just a little wonky right now. I'm trying to figure that out.
Yeah. I got a weird German amp in right now. A Ecolet Clement.
Oh, cool.
It's a Ecolet. It's just like a JTM 45 clone. It's pretty old. I don't know exactly when. It's got like an old PCB in it, like
Yeah,
old brown
yeah.
PCBs. Yeah, guy picked it up at like an estate sale or something.
Does it
They're all-
slide into like a head cab or anything, or?
Yeah, it has a head cab. It's
Yeah.
it's pretty neat looking. All these like fuses, all these fuses were like tack soldered in there. I guess they didn't have like the right size fuse. So I was worried that I was gonna have to get creative, but it just takes the this whatever the smaller fuse is,
Oh yeah.
I feel they call the 5x20s. It just takes a 5x20, but it has this like real old, like, let's see if I can get it on there. It's just like these real old like clips in there that hold the. So we'll see. I don't know if I don't know if I'm gonna trust that to hold a fuse. And then I'm also just gonna see some things that I try to keep things as original as possible, but there are some situations like in case of like an old amplifier like this, where if it doesn't make sense to keep that fuse in there, I'll just like bridge it. Like if it's like, what is this fuse doing? And is it even worth even having it in, risking that the fuse might fall out? Or am I going to have to destroy the board to put in a fuse holder? I think that's where you get with some of these weird amps that like don't have common replacement parts. You know, you would never do that to a Fender or a Marshall or whatever, because like everything's available. But with this thing, the schematic, the user manual is written in German. It's pretty neat. I'm excited to get that up and working. I'm ready to throw this basement out the window though.
Yeah. Those are always I know it's like an annoying thing to say when you're going through it, but I feel like sometimes those, like your basement, those are the amps that I guess it splits down the middle, but sometimes it is some insane problem and you're so happy you found it, or you get to the finish line and you're like, I forgot I never actually just tried swapping tubes, or like something you almost like forget you didn't, or like you trick yourself into getting.
I don't have to do this that often. Well, I do this all the time on PCB amps. I take notes, like I write things down, like check this, I check this test point, I check that test point, like I replace this part, I replace that part. On like hand wired amps or hard, like old Fenders, like I never take notes on them. Like I never really need to. Other than writing, sometimes I write down voltages just to like double check them against a schematic or something. But for the most part, I know most of the voltages by heart on these old 60s era Fenders. So like you just know by probing, you don't even have to write anything down. But anyway, I just like you said, I was asking a buddy about this. Adam from Satellite Amps is like my mentor. I ask him questions every time I get stuck or need somebody about something off of my email. I message him, and I said I tried swapping out the transformers, and then I was like, wait a second, did I actually swap the transformer? So I was like, all right, it's time. I gotta start taking notes. So I got my notebook now. Write everything down. And it helps organize my thoughts. Even like writing it down, I was writing it down for for next week, me. But honestly, like I'm writing it down, I'm like, wait a second, all right. I started coming to these conclusions, and I started, all right, I need to put a signal in it, and I need to test the signal here, here, and here. And I actually did get a little further on it, but I don't know, man. I think it's good. If it was mine, I would have just rebuilt the whole thing. I'd have been done. I'd have been done if I would have rebuilt the whole thing by now. Like,
Yeah. Well, and that's like another, how people nickel and dime, or how maybe whether it's us or the customer, but it's like, when let's say you think you might know what the issue is, and there's like the moment where you're like, you could replace the one bad filter cap or the one bad coupling cap, or you like, hey, I think it's going to be these, and just swap all of them, and kind of that kind of game of that stuff too. Like you said, you could have ended up, I'm sure that amp probably, like you said, has all new electrolytics. Not that it sounds like a plate resistor issue and like that, but are there any other parts you kind of like just went for, or just like the power tubes, those new, or no?
yeah, I mean, I replaced them, and if that wasn't the problem, then I put them back. So yeah. Oh my God. I mean, I guess I didn't replace every single cap, but like I ruled out every single cap, like it's still, it doesn't look,
Oh yeah.
It happens on both channels. So it's got to be in the phase inverter, it's got to be after these 470Ks. Like I swapped out like the whole cathode, on the phase inverter, all those resistors, because I thought sometimes these resistors, like they have like a hairline crack and you can't see it, or like the lead's about to fall out, and as soon as you go to replace it, like it falls apart, and you're like, oh, there it is. So I just like took those resistors out, tack soldered some new ones in, wasn't it, so I put the old resistors back in. The coupling caps in the phase inverter are always like, there are certain problems that you come, like I'm not telling you because but this could be an unequal phase inverter. Like one of those caps could be extruding, DC voltage, and if that were the case, it would cause this exact problem. And I was like, for sure that was it. When I checked all these other things, so like, I was like, boop, swap these caps out, and that was very early in the repair. That was like within the service fee, pretty much. Like I replaced those phase inverter caps out of the service fee, because like it's just like beep bop, and then I just thought for sure that was it, and then no dice.
Yeah.
But you got anything? Your bench. How close is you? What did you have? Was it your dummy load, or?
Yeah, maybe. It's funny. I just bought these. I haven't even used them yet. When I first got into this stuff, it's kind of a funny. I went to Radio Shack, RIP, and made like a dummy box out of wood, which was a horrible idea because wood and heat and everything, and the resistors weren't big enough, so it would always smoke when I used it. And then eventually leveled up. I actually did this for this like pedal event here in Philly, where you could sell, that people were selling amps and guitar pedals, and I was selling amps. So I got these load boxes, and I was using them hooked up with headphone amps, so people could like crank an amp and listen to it. That didn't go as well as maybe it sounds like it could have. The one amp actually blew an output transformer, but that was but anyway, so I use these reactive load boxes, and it's actually, I'm starting to realize the kind of why it's sometimes better to have a resistive load for like doing power and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You don't need a fancy like reactive load.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's what I got. God, I'm having problems with mine actually. So let me see if I can take my kids off of there. Oh yeah. All right. Let's see. So I downgraded to a digital scope, because It's just smaller, I have an analog scope, analog scope up there somewhere. Yeah, that's my old scope, but it's just so big. And these digital ones already have the voltage readouts and stuff. I switched over that. And then this box, let's see if I can get closer. This box, I can switch it from dummy load to speaker, and then switch the visual from dummy load to speaker. And I have so the amp, let's see, the amp goes into my impedance matcher.
Oh, cool.
And then on the other side of the impedance matcher, it goes to my dummy load, or sorry, my attenuator. And then from the attenuator, it goes into this box. And from the box, it gets hooked up to the scope. And then from the box, it gets hooked up to the speaker that's underneath. And then I also have, this is where I need to troubleshoot something. So this new scope has a signal generator, but I can't get the signal generator to show up through the amp correctly. It like oscillates out like at the slightest volume increase. So it's unfortunate because I had all my wires, they go underneath of the bench and then they come out the front here. I can't reach my camera over there, but they come,
Yeah, I think I've seen that stuff for you. You've posted. That's cool.
Yeah, the signal and the output come out here, so I can just like plug into the amp, but the signal generator is not working. So I got old trusty there. That's where my signal generator is coming out. But yeah, I don't know. And there's just too big, just like I got two big resistors in my dummy load here. Which is probably redundant because I can just use the attenuator. Like this good Marshall power brake attenuator is awesome. It's got a fan, so it's reactive load. So like as the volume increases, the fan runs. That thing is awesome.
I've trying to think what you can't see here about my bench, but
you had like a big black box. I don't remember what it was though. And I was like, oh, that looks cool. It was your voltage. Was it a voltage thing? It had like current and AC voltage.
Man, no. I'm not sure I know which thing you're talking about. I'm trying to think, looking around. Oh, I wonder if I used to have. Yeah, well, so I inherited a whole lot of old electronics equipment when I was leaving college, and it was cool, some of it, but it was really sketchy. And the one thing I have is a tube-based power supply. And I used to keep that almost just for vibe. It looked cool. I would use it a few times. It was scary as hell. It could do up to like, I think 700 volts just on these like little dicey terminals. It felt like a bomb. So this is kind of cleared up, but I pretty much have, so you can have, I've always had like a really clean, I feel like especially when I've done other stuff like pedal, you need like a clean, nice amp that is just sterile sounding,
Yeah.
And then I just have, like a cat, this attenuator here, a variac. I think honestly, I might have, I don't know if it was you or Tom or somebody posted. I always had a variac and I always hated I didn't have a voltage meter on it. Either you or somebody I saw had like one of those like little cheapy like Amazon ones.
Yeah.
I did that. I've also had so many different fume extractors and I never used them until, again, I think maybe I saw, do you have this thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that one, and honestly, I still don't use it enough probably, but at least that one, because the other, like the Weller one, you have to get so close to your work. It feels like almost
it's so clunky and
it's annoying. Yeah.
And this one, I mean, and all of them, they're just loud. Like I don't use it as enough because I'll use it like if I'm doing like a electrolytics on a Fender board, there's a lot of soldering, so I'll flip it on. Or if I'm like building an amp, I'll flip it on. But a lot of times when I'm troubleshooting, I'll just turn it on.
Yeah, same.
But I did two things. So I mounted it to the wall. So that way I can just like move the cord around, and then I added a switch because I hated turning the knob.
Yeah.
Like the knob. So now it's always on. I just turn the switch on.
Cool. What do you my one other thing I think I guess you can see the back of the shop. I've always had kind of like a burn-in bench. I moved that amp on it now because of this, so I had this clear. But so I have audio lines running through the rafters, through the joists, and I come down there and I can just plug into like, have 3 amps going all day as like a stereo or something. When I'm burning in stuff and everything.
So how does that work?
So I have I don't know if you can see, I have this like little mixer. I have a radio. I actually have some attenuators in line with it, so I can turn it down a little bit. But I have it just going up. I have it lines. I have like a line here to plug in, but over there I have some mult boxes, and I can just plug a cable in and then just plug into an amp. That's what I usually. I mean, I play test amps, but I often just use them so I can hear them, and to hear if anything happens or gets weird with it, I just play like whatever I'm listening to, through them.
Yeah.
Off and on throughout the day.
Yeah, I burn them in on the bench. I usually I'll finish it up and then I'll just go start cleaning up the shop. I'll burn it in for half an hour and then that's it. Then as long as I can tell the signal's good, then I'll just go leave it on in my amp corner and then play a couple notes through.
Yeah.
Call it done. On those real problematic amps, I'll run it on my bench on the signal generator, kind of just off to the side while I'm watching it, while I'm working on something else.
Yeah, I've done that. I've even gotten so desperate. I've had electrical, I've had tape on the scope to hey, if the signal changes from that, almost kind of okay. I'm pretty, going back to the pricing stuff. There's in business classes, there's kind of the there's this 3-way thing. You say good, cheap, and fast. Pick 2. You can kind of have 2 of them as your business. And my thing, I guess, has been going back to the pricing. I kind of am pretty obsessive with this stuff. I don't want it to come back to me. So I'll actually let a lot of amps, when I'm done, I'll have them on for 12 hours, off and on.
Yeah.
And if somebody's coming to pick it up, I'll honestly replay it and test it because I'm paranoid. Sometimes pots, even though you've cleaned them 100 times, they sit for a week, and for some reason, I don't want somebody to turn it on and be like, what the hell? Why is this pot still dirty? So I'll kind of go overboard, but it, again, definitely hurts my bottom line to spend too much time on amps. But
yeah, I mean, you start charging a little bit more because it's worth it. People, if they want a cheap job, they'll go somewhere else. If they want it to make sure it's right, they'll make it to you.
I've been told by one person, they were I won't say, but let's say kind of in the industry, and he's like, you're too cheap, and that kind of hurts all of us, which I honestly don't think is true. I don't think this was years ago. But I've just always kind of thought of that
Yeah, that can be true. I mean, I'm sure there are people screaming at me and us right now, dude, Luke, you should have charged them $1,000 for that basement, now we're going to look bad if we charge them that, and that's true. I mean, that's definitely true. I try to be honest with the customers when I tell them, listen, I don't want to make them feel guilty, but you're just listen, I did a lot of work on this amp, so don't think everybody will do this, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I'm starting we began talking a couple of weeks ago.
Came to see you. Amazing, man.
Starting to try to
Yeah, 'cause
do
I've
this
interviewed-
just for the good customers, my good friends, so I can focus on doing things for myself and try to make money on things that are, for myself rather than for other people. I feel like I'm capable of doing that with just a little bit of restructuring. And that'll help.
Sorry, when you were kicked off before, we were talking, and I was kind of mentioning, and I can't think how it was on that, but I guess saying kind of different customer, kind of different markets, and I used to do more, I played in punk bands and stuff, so I'd get more of a hey, I don't want to spend a lot of money on this, I heard of you, blah blah blah, can you fix this amp, and just do the bare minimum. And what I always found was, well, when you do that, a lot of times you look at an amp and you're like, this amp's been beat to hell. You're gonna need, it needs the caps changed. They work sort of, but they shouldn't. Or this is bad. You need a power cable. This is sketchy. Blah blah blah. But they want the bare minimum. If it needs 1 tube, they just want to pay for 1 tube. And I used to kind of try to meet people there, and then at least in my experience, usually ends up hurting you. Like it's gonna die again, you know, then
Yeah.
they're annoyed because they just paid you to repair it, even though, you know, you told them.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah,
kind of losing my
I
train of
only-
thought here, but
Yeah, I only do those, like, you're exactly right. Like it ends up only hurting you because
Yeah.
you said that you were gonna fix it. You said it was fixed, even though it was under their stipulations and it's broken, and then they tell their friends that you worked on it. It's never good.
yeah.
I'll do it. I'll do some of the cheap stuff for like friends, like real friends. Like my buddy came over yesterday and like I did a quick setup on his guitar. It had some cracks in the finish. He probably, you know, he's like, oh, I had this guitar in my closet for 10 years. And, you know, I just like cleaned the fretboard off real quick intonation. Like, you know, I never would have done that for a customer, but I also didn't charge him. Right. And he's just a friend. So there are situations where I'll do real quick things, but
I have a quick question I'd like for you guys to maybe address.
yeah.
For all of us folks watching who do not work on amps and don't plan to work on amps, we're chisels and guitars. What kind of crap do you not want us to be sending you? As our neighboring amp repair guy up the road, we have people coming in with pedals that a 9-volt battery, you know, pin mount or, you know, surface mount board or, you know, adapter is broken, or mixing boards, or a modern, you know, crate amp, or I mean, what are the thresholds? What's the biggest things you guys don't want us to be bothering you with by referring people to you?
Yeah, well, Matthew and I can give you our answer, but I feel like there's a lot of different shapes and sizes of amp techs, and I know amp techs that will fix anything. They'll fix my buddy my buddy Lane, he can fix mixers and pedals and whatever. He's really good at it. But me, I'll answer first, and then Matthew, you can answer. Me, I want boutique amps and vintage amps. So like, and I can do, and Fender Deluxes, Hot Rod Deluxes, DeVilles, Blues Juniors, like they're like kind of exception to new stuff. But like a Boss Katana, like no, you know, new Ampegs, no, pretty much any
Booyakasha, check
new,
this out, yo.
some
I
of
is
the
here with
reissue
my main
Fenders,
woman,
okay, but
Naomi
yeah,
Wolf.
new, like,
She
solid
be
state stuff
well
Fenders,
important
no,
feminist and has
basically,
like
it's gotta have a
written
full set of
enough
tubes in
books
it.
about that
It's gotta have a
kind.
full set of tubes in it, and the more boutique and the more vintage, the better. No mixers, no pianos, no keyboards, no pedals.
Yeah,
No, it's not
Yeah,
the
'cause
system.
like you were
It's
saying
just
earlier,
those three guys. We just have to get those three
Dave,
guys.
about pedals,
It just
like,
didn't
if you can't
compute
get in and out
to our
of it in under
1990s
an
brains.
hour,
What's
then,
really
like,
driving it
how's it even worth
is the
working
fear
on
of
it?
being
And
capitalist roadkill.
I think maybe that's subjective depending on the pedal.
Hi, I'm Naomi
But for
Klein,
me,
and
like,
I'm here at Penguin
I
to
can't
answer
replace
some
a
big
switch
questions.
really in under an hour. By the time I need to talk to the customer, get the customer to pick it up, open the thing up, turn my soldering iron on, like I can't even replace a switch.
Algorithms are
an hour.
mimicry
Like,
machines,
yeah, maybe I'm
right? In the
exaggerating
same way
a
that
little,
AI is
but
yeah.
more broadly a mimicry
Matthew.
machine. So it just gives us more
You know,
of
so
what we
again,
just
for me,
had. It's a
to
house of
reiterate,
mirrors,
you know, like I
really.
work out
The
of,
algorithms are a house of
I
mirrors.
work
You know,
out
we've
of
all had
essentially
that
where I live.
experience of like,
So, you know, there's lower overhead there. It's not a storefront, so people can't just walk in. So if somebody has an appointment, that means
posted
we've already
videos that
talked through
said, like,
email,
I've been
spent
getting
time there.
warnings that they're
and
coming
so
for
on.
us. Are they
So,
coming for us? I mean, the breadcrumbs.
I've gotten more selective, kind of like
because
Luke said.
they're
I pretty much go
coming
for vintage
It's
stuff.
proof that you are
Some people don't do
one
Music
of the
Mans.
only
I'll work
truth
on any old
tellers.
Music Man. I know those really well. Vintage, weird stuff, boutique stuff for sure. I've done all kinds of new stuff, but over the years, like I don't even Supros, like modern Supros. My experience, you know, I don't think they're on the call who makes them, but they're garbage, but they look cool and they sound cool. And the company's great to work with. They'll just send you a new board or a new amp. But like that kind of stuff, it's like warranty work, but I'm not actually a warranty shop. So I send that stuff, try to send to other people. So like you
And
said,
it's just
Luke,
so
like
bizarre
guitar
because
pedals,
really,
I
I
usually
think
only
the
do that
appeal
if
of
it's
these
something
platforms is
really
zero accountability.
like,
And if somebody was
not counting
working
friends.
at a
If it's like really
broadcaster
vintage
or
or really
newspaper
cool
and they faced
or weird, like
serious
this guy had this like
allegations of,
the Allman
of criminal
Brothers tour
activity,
manager like made him
they would not
something,
stay
like
on
something
the air.
that's
There would
like
be an
rare.
investigation. They would
But I
say, "We're
don't
gonna look
want
into
to charge
it, and
someone
when we find
$100
out,
to fix a
you know,
boss
you'll see
pedal,
them again.
and they
The
probably
way
don't
you
want to
get
pay,
canceled
pay me
is
that.
by holding yourself accountable in any kind of serious way.
So it's hard.
Someone
There's a
can't
guy, and
picture
it's funny,
any
I've
of
never
the
met
figures
him.
we're talking
There's a
about
guy,
today.
Naomi Klein, hello.
if any of you
How
are
are
near
you?
Pennsylvania,
I'm good.
near
How are
Philly,
you?
but
Very
it's in
well, thank you.
Ardmore,
Very
it's a
well.
town
Glad to
outside
have
the
you
city,
here.
and he is like,
First
I've
things
sent
first,
this guy
before we
so
get
much work because
into
he
your
fixes
wonderful
anything.
book,
He's a
Doppelganger,
authorized
Footprints in
repair
the
for like
Mirror
a
World,
Yamaha
I
weighted
just ask you
keyboard,
to
like
introduce
any of that
yourself.
kind of
Tell us who
stuff
you
that
are
maybe none
in
of
your
us
own
want,
words.
like a MIDI controller, like he
I'm
takes
Naomi
it. So
Klein.
he might
I
hate me
am
for it,
a
but
writer. I've written.
I send all that kind of
This is
stuff
my
there.
ninth book. But I also teach university students. I teach
There's a
at
guy
University
in
of British
DC that I
Columbia.
sent people same thing.
Teach
like they
environmental
do
studies
warranty. They have
in the
like
geography department. Very
just
nerdy.
scroll and scroll and scroll.
And I'm a
all their
mom,
warranty lists. But these
and
dudes are like
I live in
electrical
the
engineers.
I live in the
Like,
most
they went to
beautiful part
college
of the
for,
world,
like,
in my opinion,
like,
which is British Columbia.
for that stuff. And
My neighbors are
I
orca
think
whales.
I think
Oh my
still,
gosh.
even with a little bit of practice,
I'm slightly
we
jealous
can
of that. This is completely on a
repair those
tangent. I
things.
recently discovered
But
you can
they're
go
replacing,
snorkeling
like,
with orca whales
whole
in Norway.
boards,
And
typically.
Themselves.
Like when
This is the
we
premise
get
for a
stuff
very
like that,
wild
I
and
think
weird
when they
story.
get
And
those boss
so this book
katanas,
is
like, they're
different
called
because
boss
it's
and
more
they're gonna
personal, but
hold
it's also
the board
difficult,
and put it on
different
the
because
And I've over the I
it
cut my
is
teeth on that.
more
Like I used to fix,
experimental,
I've
a little
recapped a
bit
console. I used to
stranger. It's
do
more creative
PA
nonfiction
systems
than
and
my
stuff.
previous books
But
about climate change.
so much of that
Well,
stuff in my
look,
experience
it's what you're
actually
for
is
it,
like,
and,
can
I
be
mean,
really
there's so much in that
complicated
answer.
or need a board, but sometimes it's like just resolder the board, and it would fix it somehow.
Yeah.
But I'm just not as set up for it anymore. I've kind of tried to specialize and just like you were saying, Luke, like kind of, taking care of stuff. I'd rather there's so much work out there. I'd rather just work on cool stuff that I feel like I make money on, that I also enjoy, and as opposed to fixing all the broken 80s PA systems I can.
Here's what's crazy, man.
Yeah, and it's just what
I've
you
been
start, what
freaking
you
out
gravitate
over the last
towards,
few weeks
as a
like,
hobby,
at
and then
nighttime. Like
what
at nighttime, I'll be
you know
alone,
that you
and I
can
just start
make a
thinking
bunch
about
of
the
money
future of
on.
the world.
Yeah.
And I start like legit
There are
freaking
techs
out.
that can
Like
do stuff that
what
we
would
can't.
happen if we were like legit Armageddon?
Yeah, if I was
Mad
paying
Max,
for, if I had a
nuclear war?
storefront, or if people could just walk in and be like, "Hey, will you work on this?" Like I might be more likely to just to try out random things. But since it kind of takes a click or two to even get here, let's say into my shop, I'm kind of usually weed that kind of stuff out.
Yeah. All right. Well, we better start wrapping this thing up. I talked to you all day, but we've been on here for like an hour. I always try to do half an hour. It always ends up being an hour. Nathan, Tom, you guys got anything? Want to correct us on anything?
Nope.
Any insights, Tom?
Oh, I mean, no, I just taking a look at that echo let you or the what's that? Is that a Klimt amp?
Yeah.
That looks like, right? Is it?
Klimt.
Yeah.
Klimt. Ecolette. Yeah.
Is there a model on that?
Yeah, the BS40.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's wild. Everything's written in German. Well, actually, now that I'm looking at it, it has German and English on it. Yeah, it's really kind of wild.
Pretty wild looking. Yeah, look at that.
Yeah. The main problem being that the cap can is
Yeah.
extruding goop. I can't tell if it's coming from the cap or if it's epoxy.
Oh,
He said I kind of think it's epoxy because he said that he had it on. He said he played it, and I feel like if the cap was leaking that bad, it wouldn't be able to. It hum like crazy.
is there epoxy on the chassis anywhere? Like it was.
It was. I just like ripped it. I just ripped it out. Like it's
Okay.
just. It was really hard stuck in there, and I just ripped it out to kind of see what was going to happen.
Is that a mount? Those two black stripes on it, or is that like wrapped in electric tape or something? Or
It's wrapped in electric tape, but I can't imagine it exploded underneath. And if usually I think this stuff, it's got to be epoxy. Usually it's real crumbly when it dries out, isn't it? It's not like this is. I think this is just epoxy. So the cap can is probably fine, but I don't know. There's nowhere to really safely mount new electrolytics in there. I think I might drill a couple holes for some turret strips and put some radials in there. I just think that would be the safest thing rather than risk messing up that board. I don't know. I don't want to put a big old cap can back in there. It wasn't even mounted that way from the fact there's nowhere to mount one in there. So I guess
Are you guys still using CE caps for like everyday repairs?
No, it's funny because I think I've
These
seen
guys-
there's some other people about those cap cans being really crappy. I don't use them all that often, but just transparently, I've actually never had an issue with them. That doesn't mean I've seen it from a bunch of people post that they are. Do you have issues with them a lot?
You know what? The only ones I've ever had issues with were the 4-section 20s, like for a Princeton reverb.
Yeah.
And it almost seems like it's always the third note. Like
Huh.
it just, so I was just wondering if you guys were still using those, or if you're using like the hayseed ones.
I need to start using the hayseed, like when you sent me that link of I did not realize he does the custom ones for the 1-inch and everything. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah. I've had actually people, I've done some hi-fi work where people have had those caps already and they give them to me. So I've never actually had to order them from them, but yeah, it's good to know.
Yeah, I mean, I know I know they're super backed up. It takes like a month to get them, but
Oh yeah.
I have one on order for like a 65 Vox. The hell is it called? It's called a Super Reverb Twin. I think it was the only tube amp that they made in the US.
Huh.
Is what I think. I had never seen one before, and it was a 1-inch diameter can. So yeah, so let's probably start using them a little more. Using those cans a little more, but
yeah, I used to use them all the time.
Yeah.
But I've started to transition to only when we're trying to maintain the look. Or if it like really there's nowhere to mount other caps like safely or like in a reasonable fashion. Because I don't use them a lot, but I wish I could use them more, just like radial caps, like how do you say it? Nico.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
How do you pronounce it?
like the Nishikon caps.
Nishikon. They're so good and they're so cheap.
Yeah.
That like, why not use them? I just use them in a trainer. Because like I didn't have to drill another hole. I put a turret strip in there, a 4-section turret strip, and put them down against the chassis, and they're 10 or 20 or 30,000 hour caps. And they make
they're
them
solid.
by the
Like, okay, well, maybe I wanted to
like,
watch that
he's
one
like
video,
one
but
dude makes
in
these
history,
and,
I don't think we
this
are
whole
in
equipment, which
entirely new,
sounds
uncharted
good,
territories. I think
except
that
for it's
conspiracy
not really that
theories
great when it comes to
play
electronics.
particular roles
I'd rather
in
try to trust
our
those,
mental architecture and in our social
radio caps,
relations.
but,
I mean, one thing that
but
conspiracy
I
theories
definitely will
do
use them when
is
it makes sense.
distract us from
Have you seen those PCBs
unbearable
that
reality. So a
M2
lot of my work
built?
has
those
been
are
about the
really
climate
cool.
crisis.
Those are kind of cool. I haven't
And if
tried
I
those yet,
look
but that's a
at
neat
climate
idea.
change denial, which
Yeah,
is a
I've
conspiracy
used a
theory,
couple
right?
of
The
them
reason
this
that
week.
conspiracy has
Yeah.
gotten traction
Yeah.
is a combination of the fact that there are very
Yeah, that's
powerful
what it is,
vested
yeah.
interests
I
in our
got 'em.
society that don't want us to focus on the real causes of the warming, because it would threaten their entire business model, that being the fossil fuel companies that have underwritten that conspiracy theory. But also just the reality that, like Al Gore said back in the
Ian, you
day,
still
it is
here?
an inconvenient truth in that it does require change from us. It's always
Ian, I'll-
easier
you gotta cut the
to
recording off.
What's that?
All right, well, we'll just have to edit it down.
I got it.
All right, thank